Greenhouse Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a lot of Canadians, and I would hope that everybody in this place would agree with this right now, are really looking to us in this place to address the issue of the rising cost of living. And certainly one area that we've seen major increases in the cost of living is in energy prices. I would like to say that every Canadian wants Canada to do its part when it comes to ensuring that we have renewable energy and non-carbon emitting energy. At the same time, the reality is that as much as the government wants to talk about investment in this, investment in that, what they've actually done, what this Liberal government has done, is reduce Canada's capacity to produce energy, to supply demand for energy. And that, now that we're in a time of a global supply crunch, that means higher prices for Canadians when we have that resource here. Now, I think it's wonderful that we are looking for ways to both produce Canadian energy sustainably and ensure that we have all sorts of good ways to address climate change. But the reality is that many Canadians cannot afford to fill their car up. And for many Canadians, including my community in Calgary Nose Hill, there aren't public transit options available to them. Or, when you look at the prices of groceries with fuel as an input cost, those groceries are getting to them based on carbon-based energy. So it's, we have to address the climate crisis, but at the same time, Mr. Speaker, it's just to listen to a debate that just ignores the fact that every Canadian needs carbon energy right now. It's so out of touch. So the question should be, how are we producing Canadian energy, which is some of the most cleanest and sustainably produced energy in the world, meeting this need while looking at producing low carbon, readily available, low cost carbon alternatives like public transit, like all of these other good things. People in my community, they still need to fill their car up. That's just the reality. And ignoring that reality, it really says that we are, as a parliament, out of touch. So a while ago, I had asked the government, Mr. Speaker, because the Americans, they actually went to Saudi Arabia and Iran to ask for increased production and exports to the United States to meet their increased supply or their increased demand issue and their supply issues. But they didn't come to Canada. And I just think that is such a missed opportunity for our country. And I had asked the government why the Minister of Trade hadn't really addressed this issue, why the Americans are going to these other countries as opposed to Canada. And I think that we should be ensuring that we are producing Canadian energy and supplying it not just to our people in our country to lower prices and reap the benefits, but also to have energy supply security in the North American continent. So I'm just wondering if the government has made any progress on this, given the increased costs of energy in Canada.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Natural Resources and the Minister of Northern Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for her question. I think it's fair to say that there is no better supplier of responsibly produced oil and gas than Canada during this transition to net zero future of carbon. And why is that? It's simply because we have one of the strongest and most comprehensive climate plans in the world, and a plan that's leading the way for the oil-producing nations around the world, but certainly right here in Canada. Our plan is bold and is working, and it's in partnership with the industry. And the member knows that. In fact, it has been the industry partners that have talked about placing a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector. And as a government, we have agreed, and we're working with them to look at those outcomes. But, Mr. Speaker, companies representing a full 90% of Canada's oil sands productions have committed to reach net zero emissions by 2050. It is our job to work with that industry to get there, but it's also our job to help diversify our dependency up on the oil and gas industry to look at different options that are more respectful of the climate and of the place that we are developing and shaping together. The member talked about our relationship with the United States, and the fact is that there is no two countries in this world that share a highly integrated energy and economic relationship that is any stronger than the one that we have with the United States. We have more than 70 pipelines and nearly 36 transmission lines that cross our borders between our two countries. The network helps make America our largest energy customer with $100 billion in energy trade each year. So there are always going to be projects where we may not agree. There are going to be moments where we will disagree in any relationship. But at the end of the day, never undervalue the relationship that we share as a country with the United States when it comes to the energy sector and the relationship that we have. In saying all this, I also want to point out to the member that any transition that we do in oil and gas in this country will include the protection of jobs, the protection of communities. So transitioning to a safe and sustainable future for our children and as a country, we can do so as a world leader, but we can also do so protecting the people that depend upon those jobs, ensuring that they have the skills, that they have a strong future in this country. In terms of the affordability of gas, we all share that concern. I share it in my own riding, right across the north, an area that I represent in this House. It is a huge concern. However, the member knows that we're coming off a COVID crisis. We're in the middle of a Russian-Ukrainian war. The nature of the world is changed. It is the global picture, the global impacts that is shaping the price of fuel at the pumps today, not anything that is directly happening in this Parliament.
Honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Except for the fact that the Liberal government prior to COVID spent several years offshoring Canadian jobs to Iran and Saudi Arabia because they worked to shut down the energy sector. Can you imagine if Keystone XL pipeline had actually been built, if the Prime Minister had actually gone out and advocated for it? Can you imagine if energy infrastructure had been put in place? We could have supplied ethical, cleanly produced energy to the world at a time when it needed it, and perhaps we would have seen lower demand. So to say it's a global problem, it is a global problem. We could have been the solution, but the Liberals, they really sat on their hands and tried to make things worse over the last few years. So I'm just wondering if there's been a change in tone. I would like my colleague, given her attachment to Newfoundland, if she will stand up and proudly support the Bay du Nord project, and if she will also support the Keystone XL pipeline.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, I'll support the Bay du Nord project. I lobbied very hard our government in terms of the benefits of that particular development, only because I knew that that project was one of the lowest emitters of oil and gas in the country, and it was necessary. Our dependency on oil and gas is going to be around for the next 2 decades at least. And in order for us to transition off oil and gas, we're going to need low carbon produced oil and gas to make that happen. In terms of the XL pipeline, that was a decision of the government of the United States. That was never a decision of our government. And I noticed that Senator Munson, when he was in Alberta a while ago, he spoke to this issue. And we'll see what happens. But as it is right now, that was not a decision of the Government of Canada. But I think that you need to understand that we are the single largest supplier of energy to the United States. And we know that it's important to be competitive no matter what that energy sector is.
Well, thank everybody for their interventions this evening.